Hey yogis, in this practice we are going to be doing a full body flexibility yin yoga practice. You'll probably want to have one block somewhere close by, and we're going to start with a pose that I don't tend to do all that much, and this is focusing more on the wrists. So flexion and extension. You have the option, if you'd like, to also integrate a bit of a toe squat if you want to increase the mobility and stretch out through the feet and through the ankles. So you can simply tuck your toes underneath you here, but the emphasis of this is really going to be mainly on the wrists, and we're going to do one hand at a time. So we'll start by flexing the right palm and go ahead and place it down on the mat, and you can just use your left hand beside you for a little bit of support. Try to spread your fingertips as wide as you can and begin with the entire palm flat to the ground. And from here, you can start to lean some of your weight back onto the heels, into the hips, and just push or think of pushing your wrist forward towards the top of the mat. And as we hold it very slowly, the heel of the palm might start to lift off of the mat a little bit, which is perfectly fine. Just find your sensation in this pose. So especially if you practice a lot of vinyasa or power yoga, if you're used to all these chaturangas and downward dogs and plank poses, the wrist can get quite tight. And keep the fingertips straight and flat to the mat, but just lift more of the palm off the mat and bend the elbow just a little bit here. This should change the sensation a little bit and get it into the fingers. And slowly peel that hand off the mat. Let yourself sink and sit completely onto your heels. Just roll a little bit. And we'll go and do the same thing over with our left hand. So you can let your right hand come down to the ground just for support. Spread the fingertips really wide and then place your palm. So often the thumb will curl in a little bit as much as possible. Try to keep it straight. And start with the heel of the palm flat down to the mat. Spread the fingertips wide and just gradually send your hips back. So remember, the toe squat is optional. If it's starting to be a little bit too sensational, you can always just point your toes back behind you. And try to reduce the tension in the neck and in the shoulders. You can lift the heel and the palm a little bit off the mat, keeping the fingers there. Bend the elbow just a little bit. And lift it all the way up, shake it out, maybe take some rolls. So one more here. This time, instead of having our palm flat to the mat, we're going to have the back of the hand flat on the ground. So we'll start with the right hand again. This time you want your fingertips to point towards your knees. And just get those fingertips spreading wide, back of the hand down to the mat. And you're almost imagining that you're pushing your heel towards the top of your mat here. You should feel this a little bit more through the forearms. And the back of the palm can lift up a little bit as you bend into the elbow, but keep the fingers exactly as they are. And release and lift it up. Take a few wrist rolls and we'll go to the other side. Our last little one here for the wrists and hands. So the back of your left hand down onto the mat. Spread your fingertips wide and gradually start to bring your hips closer towards your heels. You can bend your elbow a little bit, lifting the back of the hand off the mat. And release. Let's release the tucked toes. Point your toes back behind you. It'll probably feel pretty intense. And we're going to let our hips come back onto the heels, stretching into the front of the ankles this time. So leaning your weight back, you can start to lift the shins and lift the knees off of the mat until you get a nice stretch through the front of those feet. And just using your arms back behind you for balance. Maybe close your eyes. So these are the yin poses that we usually hold for the least amount of time. But give yourself a good 10 or so breaths right here. And if you need to come out earlier, you're welcome to do so just by letting your shins come back down to the floor. Keeping a nice lift through the chest. And release. Knees and shins come back down. We'll take Malasana or yogi squat. So you might want to have a block for this one, maybe not. So this is pretty much why we worked on the feet so much. It should be a lot easier now to come into the yogi squat. But if you need a little bit more support, you can always sit yourself up on a block on either level. You can even use multiple blocks as well. Pressing the hands together, use your elbows to push the knees open a little bit wider and think of lengthening the crown of your head up towards the sky. So while you will probably feel this in your hips the most, we're also really working on spine flexibility and the integrity along the spine, dropping shoulders down and away from your ears. This also definitely works on the ankles too. And bring your fingertips down to the floor. We'll come into dangling pose, which is the only standing pose in Yin Yoga. So you can turn your feet so that they're parallel to the longer edges of your mat, and keep your knees quite bent as you fold the belly over the thighs. So stretching the entire posterior chain. Posterior chain is the chain of muscles that go from under the sole of the feet, through the back of the legs, all the way up the spine, and go all the way to the crown of the head. And if this feels quite intense, you can always lean back against a wall, or you can always come up on a block and bring it out in front of you just to close that gap. We're really not trying to have straight legs here. Bent knees is great. Relax your head, relax your neck. And try to soften as much as possible in the pose. And bring your fingertips back down to the floor, bend your knees, and you can walk your hands out in front of you. We're going to come into side sphinx pose. So rolling onto your right hip and straightening both legs. You can stack your left leg on top of your right one, and you control how deep you go into the side body stretch. So the further out you have your hand, the easier it will be. You can also lower down onto your forearm. Alternatively, the closer you bring your hand in towards you, the deeper the angle will be and the more you're going to feel it. The left hand is really just in front of you for support so that you don't tip over. And try to relax a little bit into that right shoulder. Breathing through the side body. And start to bend into your knees. We'll come out of this pose, moving to the other side. So take your time to go onto your other hip, and you can just roll over. I want to stay facing this way, so I'll just extend my legs to the other side, stacking right leg on top of the left one. They don't need to be perfectly straight. A little bit of a bend is totally fine here. And we did work quite a bit on the wrist, so try not to let all of your weight sink down into the wrist. Try to push a little bit through the fingertips and knuckles. And just relax into that left shoulder, keeping your neck neutral, chin parallel to the floor. And imagine you can breathe directly through the left side of your waist, creating more space between the left shoulder and your left hip. Bend into both knees. And we'll make our way to swan pose, focusing more on the hips. So you might want to have your block somewhere close by for this one. Right side first. You can bring your right knee behind your right wrist and extend your left leg further back behind you. And try to level out the pelvis so that you're not rolling completely over onto one side. You want some weight into that left hip, maybe putting your block underneath the glute for more support, or you can fold on over towards your right shin. And the block can go under the chest or under the forehead, or you can simply relax onto your forearms. Push into your palms, start to curl and lift back up. And before we go and do this pose on the other side, we'll just come to a child's pose. You can either make this a more restorative child's pose with the knees together, or you can make it a little bit more intense, focused on flexibility by widening the knees further away, bringing the toes together, and just relaxing down, stretching your arms out in front of you. Try to soften your belly in the pose. Walk the hands in. And we'll ease our way to swan on the other side. So this time bringing the left knee behind the left wrist and extending your right leg further back behind you. Level out the pelvis once more here so that you're not rolling or applying more weight on one side of your body. Maybe using your props under the hip, under the chest, or under the forehead. Wherever you'd like to close the gap between you and the floor. And push into the palms. Go ahead and lift back up. And just come to a tabletop pose to stretch out your left leg. We're not going to redo child's pose, but just do any little movements here that are needed just to get the blood flowing again through those hips, down the legs, pushing into the heels. And keep your block somewhere close by. We're going to lower down onto our backs, coming into supported bridge pose, and I'll give you a few options here depending on how deep you would like to go. So choose the height of block that works the best for you, either first or second level. And you want it pretty much directly underneath the tailbone. So option 1 is to make it a little bit more restorative with your knees bent and your feet flat on the ground. If you'd like to go a little bit deeper into this pose, you can extend and straighten the legs out in front of you, getting into the hip flexors. And there's also a little bit of a back bend component to this. And it might take some readjusting a little bit with the block to get it in a place where you can relax the hips down. And bring your arms wherever is comfortable for you here. And breathe deeply into your belly. So the higher your block is, the more intense this will feel, especially if you have your legs straight. It should never be painful. We are just finding our edge, holding the pose, and resolving to be still. And if you had your legs straight out in front of you, bend one knee at a time. And you can push into the heels to lift the hips up and slide the block out of the way. Before coming into Shavasana, we'll take a variation of a twist. So you can keep your left leg straight out to the floor, pull your right knee into your belly, and just cross your right knee all the way over to the left. You can use your left hand to guide that thigh and the knee down, and your right arm can extend out to the side. So in a pose like this, we're trying to create as much space between our right shoulder and our right hip as we can. And this will work various parts of your body. So you might feel this a lot in your right shoulder. You might feel it more in the hip. You might feel it more in the low back. It really tends to depend where you hold tightness in your body. Take any little adjustments that you need before finding some stillness here and holding the pose. And let's lift that right knee all the way back up. Take your time to switch sides. Bringing the pelvis back to center. Straighten your right leg. Pull your left knee in towards your chest this time. And then use your right hand to guide that right knee over and across towards the right side of your mat. And we want to reach out with that left shoulder so the collarbones are facing up. Trying to keep that left shoulder blade in contact with the floor. And this time moving that left hip further away from the left shoulder. Float that left knee all the way back up. We're going to make our way to Shavasana, final resting pose. Might feel good to just pull your knees into your belly for a few breaths. And whenever it feels good for your hips and for your low back, you can extend out, turning your palms to face up to the sky, drawing your shoulders down and away from your ears. Close your eyes and give yourself full permission to rest. And deepen your breath, filling up through the belly and through the chest. Make any little movements that feel good and help to wake you up here. And we'll roll to one side. Use arm strength to lift up and take a seat. Close your eyes once you're there, hands gathered at the heart. Really feel the effects of your practice. And bowing forward, namaste. Thank you so much, yogis, for doing this full body yin yoga practice with me. Thank you.